The French army is the land-based and largest component of the French armed forces. Along with the French Air Force, the French Navy and the National Gendarmerie, it is placed under the responsibility of the French government. The current Chief of Staff of the French Army is General Jean-Pierre Bossa. All soldiers are considered professionals following the suspension of conscription, voted in Parliament in 1997 and made effective in 2001. As of 2014 update, the French Army employed 111,628 personnel. In addition, the reserve element of the French Army consisted of 15,453 personnel of the operational reserve. In 1999, the Army issued the Code of the French Soldier, which includes the injunctions. History. Early history. The first permanent army, paid with regular wages, instead of feudal levies, was established under Charles VII in the 1420–30s. The kings of France needed reliable troops during and after the 100 Years' War. These units of troops were raised by issuing ordonnances to govern their length of service, composition and payment. These compagnies d'ordonnance formed the core of the gendarme cavalry into the 16th century, stationed throughout France and summoned into larger armies as needed. There was also provision made for Franks archers, units of bowmen and foot soldiers raised from the non-noble classes, but these units were disbanded once war ended. The bulk of the infantry for warfare was still provided by urban or provincial militias, raised from an area or city to fight locally and named for their recruiting grounds. Gradually these units became more permanent, and in 1480s Swiss instructors were recruited and some of the bandas were combined to form temporary legions of up to 9,000 men. These men would be paid and contracted and receive training. Henry II further regularized the French army by forming standing infantry regiments to replace the militia structure. The first of these, the Régiments de Picardy, Piedmont, Navarre and Champagne, were called the Les Vieux Corps. It was normal policy to disband regiments after a war was over as a cost-saving measure, with the Vieux Corps and the king's own household troops, the Maison du Roi, being the only survivors. Regiments could be raised directly by the king and so called after the region in which they were raised, or by the nobility and so called after the noble or his appointed colonel. When Louis XIII came to the throne, he disbanded most of the regiments in existence, leaving only the Vieux and a handful of others, which became known as the Petit Vieux, and also gained the privilege of not being disbanded after a war. In 1684 there was a major reorganization of the French infantry, and again in 1701 to fit in with Louis XIV's plans in the War of the Spanish Succession. This reshuffle created many of the modern regiments of the French army and standardized their equipment and tactics. The Army of the Sun King tended to wear grey-white coat with colored linings. There were exceptions, and the foreign troops, recruited from outside France, wore red or blue, while the French Guards wore blue. In addition to these regiments of the line, the Maison du Roi provided several elite units, the Swiss Guards, French Guards and the regiments of musketeers being the most famous. The white, grey-coated French infantry of the line Les Blanches with their Charleville muskets were a feared foe on the battlefields of the 17th and 18th centuries. Fighting in the 9 Years' War, the Wars of Spanish and Austrian Succession, the 7 Years' War and the American Revolution. The Revolution split the army, with the main mass losing most of its officers to aristocratic flight or guillotine and becoming demoralized and ineffective. The French Guard joined the revolt and the Swiss Guards were massacred during the storming of the Tuileries Palace. The remnants of the Royal Army were then joined to the revolutionary militias known as sans-culottes, and the National Guard, a more middle-class militia and police force, to form the French Revolutionary Army. From 1792, the French Revolutionary Army fought against various combinations of European powers, initially reliant on large numbers and basic tactics. It was defeated bloodily but survived and drove its opponents first from French soil and then overran several countries, creating client states. Under Napoleon I, the French army conquered most of Europe during the Napoleonic Wars, professionalizing again from the revolutionary forces and using columns of attack with heavy artillery support and swarms of pursuit cavalry. The French army under Napoleon and his marshals was able to outmaneuver and destroy the Allied armies repeatedly until 1812. Napoleon introduced the concept of all-arms corps, each one a traditional army in miniature, permitting the field force to be split across several lines of march and rejoin or to operate independently. The Grande Armée Acute operated by seeking a decisive battle with each enemy army and then destroying them in detail before rapidly occupying territory and forcing a peace. In 1812, Napoleon marched on Moscow seeking to remove Russian influence from Eastern Europe and secure the frontiers of his empire in client states. The campaign initially went well, but the vast distances of the Russian steppe and the cold winter forced his army into a shambling retreat preyed on by Russian raids and pursuit. The Grand Army of the 1812 campaign could not be replaced, and with the ulcer of the ongoing Peninsular War against Britain and Portugal in Spain, the French army was badly short of trained troops and French manpower was almost exhausted. After Napoleon's abdication and return, halted by an Anglo-Dutch and Prussian alliance at Waterloo, the French army was placed back under the restored Bourbon monarchy. The structure remained unchanged and many offices of the empire retained their positions. In 1830 the Bourbon monarchy was overthrown and replaced by the constitutional Orleans monarchy. The mobs proved too much for the troops of the Maison du Roi, and the main body of the French army, sympathetic to the crowds, did not become heavily involved. Desertion was rife and troops joined the crowds as they had done in 1792. While this was happening in Paris, the French army was committed to an invasion of Algeria. Now in dark blue coats and red trousers, the French troops were victorious and set the stage for French Algeria for the next 100 years. Early 20th century. In August 1914, the French armed forces numbered 1,300,000 soldiers. During the First World War, the French armed forces reached a size of 8,300,000 soldiers, of which about 300,000 came from the colonies. During the war, around 1,397,000 soldiers were killed. It was the most deadly conflict in French history. The main generals were Joseph Joffre, Ferdinand Foch, Charles Mangan, Philippe Pétain, Robert Nivelle, Franchet d'Espery and Maurice Sarrail. At the beginning of the war, the French army was wearing the uniform of the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. But the uniform was maladapted to the trenches, and so in 1915 the army replaced the uniform, with the Adrian helmet replacing the K-Acute PI. A uniform with a capote, a blue horizon color adopted to the trenches, was adopted, and the uniform for colonial soldiers colored khaki. At the beginning of the Second World War, the army deployed 2,240,000 combatants grouped into 94 divisions from the Swiss border to the North Sea. These numbers did not include the Army of the Alps facing Italy, and 600,000 men dispersed through the French colonial empire are not included in this figure. After defeat in 1940, the Vichy French regime was allowed to retain 100–120,000 personnel in unoccupied France, and larger forces in the French Empire, more than 220,000 in Africa, and forces in Mandate Syria and French Indochina. After 1945, despite enormous efforts in the First Indochina War of 1945–54 and the Algerian War of 1954–62, both lands eventually left French control. French units stayed in Germany after 1945, forming the French forces in Germany. 5th Armored Division stayed on in Germany after 1945, while 1st and 3rd Armored Divisions were established in Germany in 1951. However, NATO-assigned formations were withdrawn to fight in Algeria. 5th Armored Division was withdrawn in 1956. From 1948 to 1966, many French Army units fell under the integrated NATO military command structure. Commander-in-Chief Allied Forces Central Europe was a French Army officer, and many key NATO staff positions were filled by Frenchmen. While an upper limit of 14 French divisions committed to NATO had been set by the Treaty of Paris, the total did not exceed 6 divisions during the Indochina War, and during the Algerian War the total fell as low as 2 divisions. The Army created 2 parachute divisions in 1956. The 10th Parachute Division under the command of General Jacques Massu and the 25th Parachute Division under the command of General Sauvagnac. After the Algiers Putsch, the 2 divisions, with the 9th Marine Infantry Brigade, were merged into a new Light Intervention Division, the 11th Light Intervention Division, on 1 May 1961. Decolonization. At the end of World War II, France was immediately confronted with the beginnings of the decolonization movement. The French army was the leading force in opposition to decolonization, which is interpreted as a humiliation. In Algeria, the army repressed the first demonstrations in May 1945 with heavy fire. 45,000 Algerians were killed. Maintaining control of Algeria, where 1 million Frenchmen had settled alongside 9 million natives, was a high priority for the army. When it decided that politicians were about to sell them out and give independence to Algeria, it engineered a military coup that toppled the civilian government and put General de Gaulle back in power in the May 1958 crisis. De Gaulle, however, recognized that Algeria was a dead weight and had to be cut free. The army then planned a military coup against de Gaulle himself in 1961, but it failed. After 400,000 deaths, Algeria finally became independent. Hundreds of thousands of Muslims who were loyal to Paris went into exile in France, where they and their children and grandchildren remain in poorly assimilated banlieue suburbs. The army repressed the Malagasy uprising in Madagascar in 1947. French officials estimated the number of Malagasy killed from a low of 11,000 to a French army estimate of 89,000. Cold War era. During the Cold War, the French army, though not part of NATO's military command structure, planned for the defense of Western Europe. In 1977, the French army switched from multi-brigade divisions to smaller divisions of about 4 to 5 battalions, regiments each. From the early 1970s, 2nd Army Corps was stationed in South Germany, and effectively formed a reserve for NATO's Central Army Group. In the 1980s, 3rd Army Corps headquarters was moved to Lille and planning started for its use in support of NATO's Northern Army Group. The Rapid Action Force of 5 light divisions was also intended as a NATO reinforcement force. In addition, the 152nd Infantry Division was maintained to guard the intercontinental ballistic missile bases on the Plateau d'Albion. In the 1970s-1980s, 2 light armored divisions were planned to be formed from school staffs. The 12th Light Armored Division was to have its headquarters to be formed on the basis of the Staff of the Armored and Cavalry Branch Training School at Somla. In the late 1970s, an attempt was made to form 14 reserve light infantry divisions, but this plan, which included the recreation of the 109th Infantry Division, was too ambitious. The planned divisions included the 102nd, 104E, 107E, 108E, 109E, 110E, 111E, 112E, 114E, 115th, and 127th Infantry Divisions. From June 1984, the French Army Reserve consisted of 22 military divisions, administering all reserve units in a certain area, 7 brigades de zone de défense, 22 regiments inter-armies divisionnaires, and the 152nd Infantry Division, defending the ICBM launch sites. The plan was put into action from 1985, and brigades de zone, such as the 107th Brigade de Zone, were created. But with the putting in place of the Reserves 2000 plan, the brigades de zone were finally disbanded by mid-1993. Post-Cold War era 1st Army Corps was disbanded on 1 July 1990. In February 1996, the President of the Republic decided on a transition to a professional service force, and as part of the resulting changes, 10 regiments were dissolved in 1997. The specialized support brigades were transferred on 1 July 1997 to Lunéville for the signals, Haguenau and Strasbourg. The 2nd Armored Division left Versailles on 1 September 1997 and was installed at Châlons-en-Champagne in place of the disbanding 10th Armored Division. On 5 March 1998, in view of the ongoing structural adoptions of the French Army, the Minister of Defense decided to disband 3rd Corps, and the dissolution became effective 1 July 1998. The headquarters transitioned to become Headquarters Commandement de la Force d'Action Terrestre. During the late 1990s, during the professionalization process, numbers dropped from the 236,000 in 1996 to around 140,000. By June 1999, the Army's strength had dropped to 186,000, including around 70,000 conscripts. 38 of 129 regiments were planned to be stood down from 1997 to 99. The previous structure's 9 small divisions and sundry separate combat and combat support brigades were replaced by 9 combat and 4 combat support brigades. The Rapid Action Force, a corps of 5 small rapid intervention divisions formed in 1983, was also disbanded, though several of its divisions were resubordinated. Structure and organization. The organization of the Army is fixed by Chapter 2 of Title 2 of Book 2 of the 3rd part of the Code of Defense, notably resulting in the codification of Decree 2000-559 of 21 June 2000. In terms of Article R 3222-3 of the Code of Defense, the Army comprises the Army Chief of Staff, the Army Staff, which gives general direction and management of all the components, the Army Inspectorate, the Army Human Resources Directorate, the Forces, a territorial organization, the services, the personnel training and military hire training organisms. The operational organization of the Army combines units from various corps in 17 brigades under the commandement des Forces Terrestres. In 2011, CFT directs the Corps de Réaction Rapide France to état Major des Forces, the 1st Mechanized Brigade, the 2nd Armored Brigade, the 3rd Mechanized Brigade, the 6th Light Armored Brigade, the 7th Armored Brigade, the 9th Light Armored Marine Brigade, the 11th Parachute Brigade and the 27th Mountain Infantry Brigade. Arms of the French Army. The Army is divided into corps or arms. They include the Troupes de Marine, the Armored Cavalry Branch, the Artillery, the Military Engineers, the Infantry, which includes the Chasseurs Alpins, Specialist Mountain Infantry, Maintenance Material, Logistics, Signals, and Commissariat. The Légion étrangère was established in 1831 for foreign nationals willing to serve in the French armed forces. The Legion is commanded by French officers. It is an elite military unit numbering around 7,000 troops. The Legion has gained worldwide recognition for its service, most recently in Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan since 2001. It is not strictly an arm but a commandement particulier. The Troupes de Marine are the marine infantry of the French Army, the former colonial troops, deployed overseas. They are composed of marine infantry, which includes parachute regiments such as 1 RPIMA and light cavalry such as the RICM, and the marine artillery. They are often deployed around the world. The Aviation Légider l'Armée Écoutée de Terre was established on the 22nd of November 1954 for observation, reconnaissance, assault and supply duties. It operates numerous helicopters in support of the French Army. Its primary attack helicopter is the Eurocopter Tiger, of which 80 were ordered. It is an arm with a commandement particulier. Administrative services. On the administrative side, there are now no more than one direction and two services. The Army Human Resources Directorate manages human resources of the Army and training. The two services are the Service of Ground Equipment, and the Integrated Structure of Operational Maintenance of Terrestrial Materials. This joint-oriented service is responsible for project management support for all land equipment of the French Army. The holding operational equipment. The Army is headed by the Service de Maintenance Industrielle Terrestre. Historically there were other services of the Army who were all grouped together with their counterparts in other components to form joint agencies, serving the entire French armed forces. After the Health Service and the Service of Species replaced respectively by the French Defense Health Service and Military Fuel Service, other services have disappeared in recent years. In 2005, the Army Historical Service became the Land Department of the Defense Historical Service. In September 2005, the Central Engineering Directorate was merged with its counterparts in the Air Force and the Navy to form the Central Directorate of Defense Infrastructure. On 1 January 2006, the Central Directorate of Telecommunications and Informatics was incorporated into the Central Directorate of the Joint Directorate of Infrastructure Networks and Information Systems. The Army Commissariat was dissolved on 31 December 2009 and integrated into the Joint Service du Commissariat des Armées Écoutées. There is the Diocese of the French Armed Forces, which provides pastoral care to Catholic members of the Army. It is headed by Luc Ravel and is headquartered in Les Invalides. Military regions. For many years up to 19 military regions were active. The 10th Military Region supervised French Algeria during the Algerian War. However, by the 1980s the number had been reduced to 6. The 1st Military Region with its headquarters in Paris, the 2nd Military Region at Lille, the 3rd Military Region at Rennes, the 4th Military Region at Bordeaux, the 5th and 6th at Lyons and Metz respectively. Each supervised up to 5 division militaire territorial, military administrative subdivisions. In 1984 sometimes supervising up to 3 reserve regiments each. Today under the FR, Zone de Défense et de Sécurité, there are 5 land regions: Île-de-France, Northwest, Southwest, Southeast and Northeast.